The moment the IRS agents walked through the glass doors of Langley and Associates, I knew everything was about to change. It started like any other Thursday morning. The office hummed with activity. Phones ringing, keyboards clicking, the scent of fresh coffee lingering in the air. A few employees were huddled near the break room, exchanging gossip about the latest office drama. Just another day in corporate hell. Then the doors swung open and they walked in. 3 of them. 2 men, 1 woman. Dressed in dark suits, their presence commanding the room like a sudden thunderstorm. They weren't salespeople, they weren't clients. Everyone knew that instantly. These were people who didn't come for meetings. They came for investigations. At first there was confusion. The receptionist, Lily, a young woman with a nervous disposition, blinked rapidly before standing up. Good morning, how can I? One of the men, tall with graying hair, flipped open his badge. IRS. We need to speak with Victoria Langley. That single sentence sent a wave of shock through the office. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Haley, one of Victoria's favorite employees, nearly dropped her coffee. Mark, another of her golden children, subtly reached for his phone, no doubt to text someone about the unexpected visitors. I sat at my desk watching. Waiting. This was the moment I had been anticipating for weeks. Months even. Victoria's office was at the far end of the floor, an imposing glass-walled space that she had decorated to reflect her personality. Cold, expensive, and intimidating. From my desk, I had a clear view of the agents making their way toward it, their polished shoes clicking against the marble floor. Victoria had no idea they were coming. And that was the best part. Victoria Langley was the kind of boss who thrived on control. She ruled the office like a queen, deciding who got raises, who got demoted, and who got treated like an afterthought. If you weren't on her good side, you were nothing. And unfortunately for me, I had never been on her good side. But I had tolerated her. Until she made the mistake of cutting my salary while giving her favorites raises. Until I found out what she was really hiding. And that's why, as the IRS agents entered her office, I leaned back in my chair, crossed my arms and smiled. Inside Victoria's office. Through the glass walls, I saw Victoria look up from her laptop as the agents entered. At first she looked confused, then mildly annoyed. She was used to being in charge. I couldn't hear the conversation, but I could read body language well enough. The lead agent pulled out a file, placed it on her desk and started talking. Her expression changed instantly. I saw it, the flicker of fear. Then she laughed. It was the same fake, condescending laugh she always used in meetings when someone challenged her. She thought she could talk her way out of this. But then the second agent spoke. He slid another document in front of her. Her smile disappeared. Victoria sat back, arms folded, shaking her head as if denying what she was hearing. But the agents weren't backing down. The woman among them, a sharp-eyed investigator, leaned in and said something that made Victoria's face go pale. I almost wished I could hear it. Almost. Because seeing her squirm? That was even better. Back in the main office, everyone was whispering. What do you think is happening? Haley muttered to Mark. IRS? Jesus. That's serious, Mark said, typing furiously on his phone. Do you think she's in trouble? She has to be, someone else chimed in. I mean, when does the IRS just show up like that? They all sounded worried. Of course they did. They were on her payroll, the real payroll. They had benefited from her underhanded accounting, receiving raises while the rest of US got pay cuts and excuses. If Victoria went down, it wasn't impossible that they'd be dragged into it too. I said nothing. I just waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. Victoria's voice, usually calm and cutting, suddenly rose. Through the walls I could see her leaning forward now, arguing. Her face was flushed, her manicured hands gesturing wildly. The IRS agents weren't reacting. They were just watching her unravel. Then she stood up abruptly. She pointed at the door, shouting something. I could almost imagine the words. This is ridiculous. Do you know who I am? Then suddenly, a knock on my desk. I looked up. Lily, the receptionist, stood there, pale as a ghost. Ethan, they want to see you. The entire office turned to stare at me. And I just smiled. Because this was exactly what I had planned for. The game had begun. It started with a single email. Subject: Salary Adjustment Notice. From Victoria Langley. To Ethan Carter. I remember the moment I opened it. The office was quiet, just the soft hum of the air conditioning and the occasional ringing of phones. It was a normal morning until it wasn't. I clicked the email, scanning the words once, then again. Effective immediately, your salary will be adjusted to reflect current budgetary constraints. This decision is final and non-negotiable. My heart sank. A pay cut. No explanation, no meeting, no warning. Just a cold, corporate slap in the face. I clenched my jaw and forced myself to read it again, hoping I had misunderstood. But the numbers didn't lie. A 15% reduction. Enough to sting. Enough to make me furious. I pushed back from my desk, staring across the office. I saw Victoria in her glass-walled office, sipping coffee, scrolling through emails, completely unaffected. She hadn't even bothered to tell me in person. I wasn't the type to cause a scene, but this wasn't right. I had been working at Langley and Associates for 5 years. I put in extra hours, managed major projects, and always did my job well. I wasn't expecting a raise, but I wasn't expecting a cut either. Not until I found out where the money was actually going. The budget constraints lie. At first, I tried to be rational. Maybe it was true. Maybe the company was struggling. Maybe I wasn't the only one affected. So I started asking around. "Hey, Haley," I said casually the next morning at the coffee machine. "Did you get that weird email from Victoria about salary adjustments?" Haley, one of Victoria's favorite employees, frowned. "What email?" I hesitated. "The one about budget cuts." She gave me a confused look, then laughed. "Budget cuts? No way. Actually, I just got a raise last week." "A raise?" I forced a smile. "Oh, that's great." But inside, I felt a fire ignite. Over the next few days I paid attention. And what I found made my blood boil. "Mark, just got a new company-sponsored laptop." "Haley, a 10% salary increase. More than what was cut from me." "Ben, a brand new expense account to entertain clients." And yet Victoria had the nerve to tell me the company couldn't afford my salary. I wasn't the only one she had cut either. I spoke to Lisa from accounting. Same story. Her salary was reduced. Daniel from IT. Pay cut. But when I checked the numbers, when I dug deeper, something didn't add up. Because even with these supposed budget cuts, Victoria's inner circle kept getting richer. It was blatant favoritism. And the worst part? It was illegal. I wasn't an accountant, but I was good with numbers. And Victoria? She was sloppy. Late one evening I stayed back at the office. The place was empty except for the janitor vacuuming the hallways. I logged into the company's internal system and started looking. It took less than an hour to find what I needed. The real reason behind the budget cuts. Victoria had been reallocating salaries, funneling money into private accounts, labeling it as employee incentives while cutting pay for others. In simple terms, she was stealing company money and disguising it as performance rewards for her favorites. And guess who was footing the bill? People like me. I knew I had two choices. 1. Accept it, keep my head down and let Victoria get away with it. 2. Do something about it. I chose the second. But I couldn't just confront her. She was powerful, connected, and ruthless. If I accused her without proof, she'd bury me. So I needed a plan. The plan to take her down. I started gathering evidence. Emails. Proof that she was shifting company funds. Payroll records, showing pay raises for her favorites while cutting others. Expense reports, doctored numbers that made no sense. I took screenshots, saved documents, and printed copies. Every night I built my case. Then I made one final move. I sent an anonymous tip to the IRS. And that's how we got here. That's why, as I walked toward Victoria's office at Lily's summons, I wasn't scared. I was ready. Victoria had played her game for too long. Now, it was my turn. I wasn't looking for trouble. Not at first. But once I suspected Victoria was up to something, I couldn't ignore it. The pieces weren't fitting together, and my instincts told me that if I kept digging, I'd find something. The real discovery happened late one night, long after the office had emptied out. Most of my coworkers had gone home. The cleaning crew had already done their rounds. The only sound was the faint hum of the fluorescent lights and the distant ticking of the office clock. I was supposed to be finishing up a report, but instead I found myself staring at the company's financial system, scrolling through payroll records. And that's when I saw it. Numbers that didn't make sense. Victoria had always justified our salary cuts with one phrase. The company is struggling. That was the lie she had fed us. And yet, right there in the system, the truth was staring back at me. I saw a list of recent salary changes, a record of pay raises and deductions. And what did I find? Haley, a 10% increase. Mark, a new monthly bonus. Ben, reimbursed work expenses that totaled more than half my yearly salary. And then there was me. Ethan Carter, 15% pay cut. Lisa from accounting, 12% pay cut. Daniel from IT, 10% pay cut. The pattern was obvious. Victoria wasn't cutting costs to save the company. She was shifting money, taking from some employees and funneling it to her favorites. I felt my hands tighten into fists. But this wasn't enough. It was bad, sure, but favoritism isn't illegal. It's unfair, unethical, but not something I could take to the authorities. I needed something bigger. And that's when I found it. The slush fund. I had almost given up for the night when I stumbled across a strange account. It was buried deep in the system, labeled as an employee incentive program. But the numbers didn't add up. This program was pulling thousands of dollars every month, more than what should have been allocated to employee bonuses. And when I cross-checked the deposits, I noticed something suspicious. Some of the money wasn't going to employees at all. It was being moved elsewhere. $5,000 here. $8,000 there. $12,500 transferred just last month. All disguised as performance rewards. At first, I thought maybe it was going toward company expenses, events, travel, maybe even vendors. But when I followed the paper trail, I realized none of it made sense. Because the money wasn't going back into the company. It was being funneled into private accounts. And one name kept showing up over and over again. Victoria Langley. My hands trembled as I clicked through more records. I needed proof. Something concrete. Something that would destroy Victoria if I ever had to use it. Then I found the email. It was a confidential memo from Victoria to the company's accountant. Subject: Adjustments to EIP transfers. From Victoria Langley. To Mark Caldwell, Senior Accountant. Mark, make sure the next batch of incentives is processed by Friday. I want all the numbers cleaned up before the auditors review our books next quarter. Keep the transfers under the standard amounts. Don't want any red flags. Also, make sure the bonus payouts for Haley and Ben are processed separately so they don't overlap with the regular payroll. Let me know if you need adjustments. Victoria. I stared at the screen. For a moment, I couldn't believe what I was reading. This was it. Proof that Victoria was cooking the books. She was actively moving money around, manipulating financial records, and trying to cover her tracks. This wasn't just favoritism. This was fraud. I sat back in my chair, my mind racing. I had everything I needed. But now I had a new problem. What the hell was I supposed to do with it? This wasn't some minor office drama. This was a serious federal crime. If I reported it, Victoria wouldn't just fire me. She'd try to destroy me. She had connections, money, influence. And I was just another expendable employee. If I played this wrong, I'd lose everything. But if I played it right, Victoria would lose everything. And that thought made me smile. I knew I couldn't rush. If I confronted her directly, she'd bury the evidence before I could do anything. So I spent the next few days making copies, backing up files, and storing documents in places she'd never find them. Then I took the biggest risk of all. I sent an anonymous tip to the IRS. I didn't mention names, but I provided specific details. Transaction records, dates, account numbers. Just enough to make them curious. And then I waited. And now, as I stood outside Victoria's office with IRS agents grilling her behind those glass walls, I realized something. I had won the first battle. But the war? It was just getting started. After I sent the anonymous tip to the IRS, I expected things to be quiet for a while. I thought I had time. Time to observe, time to plan my next steps. But I was wrong. Because barely 2 days later, everything changed. It started as a feeling. You know that sinking sensation when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking? The uneasy awareness that someone is watching you? That's what it felt like. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. Victoria had no way of knowing it was me. I had covered my tracks, used a private network, wiped my browsing history. There was no way she could trace the report back to me. And yet, I could feel the shift. My emails were taking longer to send. My computer lagged in ways it never had before. And worst of all, some of my files were missing. Someone had been in my system. Then came the first real sign that something was wrong. I was sitting at my desk when my work phone buzzed. Unknown number. I frowned but answered. Hello. Silence. Then, a single breath on the other end. And a voice. You should stop while you can, Ethan. I froze. My heart was hammering. The voice was distorted like it had been run through a voice changer. But the message was clear. Someone knew. And they were warning me. I started being careful. Watching what I said, who I trusted. But what I didn't realize, what I couldn't have expected, was that the person who would betray me was someone I never suspected. Someone I had considered a friend. She was one of the few people I had talked to about the salary cuts. We had commiserated over coffee about how unfair Victoria was. She had been just as angry as I was. Or so I thought. But when I came into the office one morning, I saw her walking out of Victoria's office, laughing, and my stomach dropped. At first, I tried to convince myself that it was nothing. Maybe she was just being polite. Maybe she was talking about something else. But then I checked my emails and saw a new one from Victoria. Subject: Employee Compliance Review. From Victoria Langley to Ethan Carter. Ethan, I need you to come to my office this afternoon. There are concerns about unauthorized access to company files. We'll discuss this in person. Victoria. I felt my hands go cold. He knew. But how? The only person I had confided in was Lisa. And suddenly it all made sense. Lisa had played me. She had pretended to be on my side only to turn around and report me. I found Lisa in the break room, casually stirring her coffee like she hadn't just stabbed me in the back. I walked up to her, keeping my voice calm even though I felt like exploding. You told her, didn't you? Lisa blinked, then smiled like nothing was wrong. Told who what? I leaned in. Don't play dumb. I know you told Victoria about me looking into the financial records. She took a sip of her coffee, unfazed. Ethan, you have no proof of that. And that's when I saw it. The smugness in her eyes. She was enjoying this. And I realized that she hadn't just told Victoria. She had probably been working for her all along. I clenched my jaw. You do realize she's committing fraud, right? You're covering for her. You're helping her. Lisa shrugged. And she takes care of the people who are loyal to her. Unlike you. Took everything in me not to lose it. I wanted to call her out, make a scene, let everyone know what she had done. But I didn't. Because now I knew something important. Victoria had an informant. And if I wanted to bring her down, I needed to be smarter than both of them. I left Lisa in the break room, but I wasn't defeated. If she and Victoria wanted a game, I was going to play it better. I knew Victoria would try to corner me in our meeting later. She'd try to intimidate me, accuse me, maybe even fire me on the spot. But I had one last card to play. That afternoon when I walked into Victoria's office, I had a small hidden recorder in my pocket. If she was going to threaten me, I was going to make sure I had proof. And that, I thought as I stepped through her office door, was when the real fun would begin. Victoria sat behind her desk, her manicured fingers tapping against the polished wood. Her usual smug expression was firmly in place, but there was something else in her eyes today, a hint of calculation. She thought she had me cornered. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I walked in. The hidden recorder was secure in my pocket, and my heart pounded with anticipation. This was it. Victoria gestured to the chair across from her. Ethan, sit. I didn't. Instead, I folded my arms and stared at her. What's this about? She tilted her head, pretending to be amused. You know exactly what this is about. I gave a slow shrug. Enlighten me. She sighed, leaning back in her chair. I know you've been snooping where you shouldn't. Accessing files you have no business looking at. I forced a smirk. You mean payroll records? The same ones you manipulated to funnel money to your favorites while cutting salaries for the rest of us. Her eyes narrowed. Careful, Ethan. Or what? I shot back. You'll fire me? You'd be doing me a favor. Victoria's lips curled into a smile, but it wasn't friendly. I don't need to fire you, Ethan. I can ruin you in other ways. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. You think the IRS is going to believe a disgruntled employee over a respected executive? You have nothing. No proof, no credibility. All I have to do is make a few calls and you'll never work in this industry again. I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I kept my face blank. As I had proof. The recorder in my pocket was capturing every word. And she had just given me exactly what I needed. I leaned in slightly, lowering my voice to match hers. You seem nervous, Victoria. Almost like you know you're about to get caught. Her smile faltered just for a second. I pressed on. You can lie to me, you can lie to the employees, but you think you can lie to the IRS? I chuckled. They don't play games. When they start digging, they won't just find payroll fraud. They'll find everything. Victoria's eyes darkened. Get out of my office, Ethan. I didn't move. Instead, I pulled out my phone and tapped the screen. The recording started playing. Victoria's voice. I don't need to fire you, Ethan. I can ruin you in other ways. The IRS is not going to believe a disgruntled employee. All I have to do is make a few calls and you'll never work in this industry again. Victoria's face went pale. For the first time, she looked genuinely afraid. I grinned. Oops, I said. Seems like I do have proof after all. She lunged across the desk, reaching for my phone, but I stepped back. I teased. I've already made copies. Sent them to a few trusted people. Just in case something happens to me. Victoria's breathing was shallow, her fists clenched. What do you want? She hissed. I leaned against the doorframe, enjoying the moment. Oh, I don't want anything. But the IRS? They're gonna want a lot. It didn't take long for the fallout to begin. A week later, IRS agents showed up at the office. The moment they walked in, the entire building went silent. Employees stared as the men in suits strode past, heading straight for Victoria's office. Whispers spread like wildfire. They're here for Victoria. I knew something shady was going on. She's done for. I stood by the break room, watching with satisfaction as Victoria was escorted out. Her face was pale, her confident smirk completely gone. She didn't even try to fight it. Because she knew. This wasn't something she could talk her way out of. The investigation uncovered more than I had expected. Victoria had been funneling money not just to her favorite employees but also to herself. She had doctored financial statements to avoid paying certain corporate taxes. And worst of all, she had been hiding income from the IRS. Fraud. Tax evasion. Embezzlement. It was enough to destroy her career. And it did. Within a month, Victoria was officially terminated. She was facing legal charges, and from what I heard, her assets were being frozen as part of the case against her. The mighty, untouchable Victoria? She was finished. Karma comes full circle. As for me, I walked away from the company on my own terms. HR tried to offer me a raise to stay, but I wasn't interested. I had already lined up a better job at a competing firm, one that actually valued integrity. And Lisa? She tried to save herself by pretending she had no idea what Victoria was up to. But the new management didn't buy it. She was fired the same week. One by one, the people who had benefited from Victoria's corruption paid the price. Me. I walked away with my head held high, knowing that I had done the right thing. Victoria thought she was untouchable. She thought she could get away with it. She wasn't laughing when the tax authorities started investigating. It had been a full year since Victoria's downfall. A year since she had been dragged out of that office by federal agents, her world crumbling around her. A year since I had left that toxic company behind. And what a year it had been. The news about Victoria spread fast. At first she tried to deny everything. She hired the best lawyers she could afford, claiming it was all a misunderstanding, and that she was being targeted unfairly. But evidence doesn't lie. The IRS audit revealed everything. The fraud, the falsified tax records, the payroll manipulation. She had stolen hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years, and the government was not forgiving. By the time the trial started, Victoria had lost everything. Her assets were seized. Her fancy car? Gone. Her luxury condo? Sold to pay back taxes. The powerful connections she had bragged about? They vanished. No one wanted to associate with her. And when the verdict finally came, it was merciless. 5 years in federal prison. White-collar crime doesn't always get harsh sentences, but tax fraud. That's something the government takes personally. Victoria Langley, once a feared and untouchable boss, was now a convicted felon. And let me tell you, that news was sweeter than any paycheck. Lisa gets what she deserves. As for Lisa, She had been fired almost immediately after Victoria's arrest. Turns out she wasn't as innocent as she pretended to be. The company did a full internal audit, and guess what? Lisa had been receiving under-the-table bonuses from Victoria for years. Not only was she complicit, but she had helped cover up the fraud. When she tried to apply for another job, she found out the hard way that the industry had blacklisted her. No company wanted to hire someone with a history of fraud and betrayal. The last I heard, she was working as a receptionist at a small real estate agency. A far cry from the high-paying corporate position she once had. Honestly, she got off easy. As for me, walking away from that company was the best decision I ever made. I took a new job at a firm that actually valued integrity. My salary? Higher than it ever was under Victoria. My stress levels? Non-existent. And the best part? I had gained a reputation. People in the industry knew what I did. They respected it. Some even reached out, asking for advice on handling corruption in their own workplaces. It turns out, exposing a powerful boss doesn't ruin your career. It makes you legendary. One day while scrolling through the news, I came across a small article that made me laugh out loud. Former executive Victoria Langley denied early release. Apparently, she had petitioned for an early release, citing good behavior. The judge. He denied her without hesitation. Victoria would serve every single day of her sentence. And I couldn't think of a more fitting punishment. She thought she could get away with it. She wasn't laughing now. If there's one thing I learned from all of this, it's this. No one is untouchable. People like Victoria think they can manipulate the system forever. They think they can cheat, lie, and exploit others without consequences. But the truth? Karma always comes knocking. And sometimes it comes in the form of an anonymous IRS tip. Victoria's fall sent shockwaves through the company. At first, upper management tried to downplay the scandal, acting as if she had been a bad apple, and that they had no idea what was happening. But when the IRS report became public record, it became clear that multiple executives had turned a blind eye to her crimes. The company was forced to conduct a full internal overhaul. Several high-ranking managers were quietly dismissed. New policies were put in place to ensure financial transparency. Employees who had suffered under Victoria, myself included, were offered settlements to avoid lawsuits. The company survived, but its reputation never fully recovered. They had let corruption thrive for years, and now they were paying the price. After Victoria's arrest, the remaining employees went through a tough transition. Some, like my former coworker Sarah, stayed on, hoping that the company would improve under new leadership. Others, like Daniel, the IT guy who had secretly helped me gather information, left as soon as they could. The place just feels cursed now, he told me over drinks one night. Like the ghost of Victoria is still hanging over everything. And honestly, I couldn't blame him. Even from prison, Victoria still tried to control the narrative. She gave one last interview from behind bars, blaming jealous employees and corporate politics for her downfall. They wanted to take me down, she insisted. They twisted the truth. I laughed when I saw it. Even in disgrace, she couldn't admit the truth. But the world had moved on without her. She wasn't feared. She wasn't respected. She wasn't powerful anymore. He was just a cautionary tale. For me, life was better than ever. My new job valued my skills and ethics. I had no regrets about exposing Victoria. And best of all, I slept peacefully at night knowing that justice had been served. One evening, while watching the sunset from my apartment balcony, I reflected on everything that had happened. Victoria had thought she was untouchable. She had played dirty, thinking no one would dare challenge her. But in the end, she fell. Hard. Because power built on lies and corruption never lasts. And when the truth finally comes out, it burns everything down.